Hi, and welcome to the Gilbert. Welcome to the Gilbert. Hi, and welcome to the Giving Project for Children's chapter book read aloud with Charlotte Webb. We are focusing this week on the strategy of questioning, which means that as questions pop into your head, you just want to say them out loud. As I mentioned in the last video, if I was doing this with my class, I would have the kids have a pack of Post-its with them and write down any questions they had on the Post-it and just stick it right where they were working. That way they could talk about them with a partner or share them with me or even in a small group while doing a book club. So without any further ado, let's jump right into chapter 10, an explosion. So I'll show you the picture right at the bottom. Don't mind if you hear that crazy thunder in the background. It's thundering, very, very strong thunder here right now. An explosion. Day after day, the spider waited, heading down for an idea to come to her. Hour by hour, she sat motionless, deep in thought. And having promised Wilbur that she would save his life, she was determined to keep her promise. Charlotte was naturally patient. She knew from experience that if she waited long enough, a fly would come to her web, and she felt sure that if she thought long enough about Wilbur's problem, an idea would come to her mind. Finally, one morning towards the middle of July, the idea came. Why, how perfectly simple, she said to herself. The way to save Wilbur's life is to play a trick on Zuckerman. Question. My light bulb just went on. What trick is she going to play on Zuckerman? And how is a spider going to trick a human? I think we're going to have to read along to see. If I can fool a bug, thought Charlotte, I can surely fool a man. People are not as smart as bugs. Really? That's as simple as my question is this time. Really? People are not as smart as bugs? Well, according to Charlotte, they're not. Wilbur walked into his yard just at that moment. What are you thinking about, Charlotte? He asked. I was just thinking that people are very gullible. What does gullible mean? Easy to fool, said Charlotte. That's a mercy, replied Wilbur, and he laid down in the shade of his fence and went fast asleep. The spider, however, stayed awake, gazing affectionately at him and making plans for his future. Summer was half gone, and she knew she didn't have much time. That morning, just as Wilbur fell asleep, Avery Arable wandered into the Zuckerman's front yard, followed by Fern. Avery carried a live frog in his hand. I've seen frogs before in our backyard, and they are very quick, so I'm impressed to see how Avery caught that frog. Avery must also be very quick then. Fern had a crown of daisies in her hair, and the children ran for the kitchen. Just in time for a piece of blueberry pie, said Mrs. Zuckerman. Look at my frog, said Avery, placing the frog on the drain board and holding his hand out for pie. Take that thing out of here, said Mrs. Zuckerman. He's hot. He's almost dead, that frog, said Fern. He is not. He lets me scratch him between the eyes. And the frog jumped and landed in Mrs. Zuckerman's dishpan full of soapy water. You're getting pie on you, said Fern. Can I look for eggs in the hen house, Aunt Edith? Run outdoors, both of you, and don't you bother with the hens. It's getting all over everything, shouted Fern. His pie is all over the front. Come on, frog, cried Avery, and he scooped up his frog, and the frog kicked and splashed soapy water onto the blueberry pie. Oh, another crisis, groaned Fern. Let's swing on the swing, said Avery, and the children ran to the barn. Mrs. Zuckerman had the best swing in the county. It was a single, long piece of heavy rope tied to the beam over the north doorway. At the bottom end of the rope was a far knot to sit on. It was arranged so that you could swing without being pushed. You climbed a ladder to the hayloft, and then holding the rope, you stood at the edge, looked down, and were scared and dizzy. Then you got up all your nerve, took a deep breath, and jumped. For a second, you seemed to be falling to the barn floor far below, but then suddenly the rope would catch you, and you would sail through the barn going a mile a minute with the wind rustling in your hair and your ears and your hair, and you would zoom up to the sky and look up at the clouds, and the rope would twist you and turn you and twist you and twist you. And then you would drop down, down, down out of the sky and come sailing back up into the barn, almost into the hayloft, and then sail out again. Not quite so far this time. And then in again, not so high. And then out, and then in, and then out, and then in, and then you jump off and fall down and let somebody else try. exciting. Would you try that? I think I'd be a little scared. I think my kiddo would. Brendan definitely would. He'd be excited to try that. Mothers for miles around worried about Zuckerman's swing. They feared some child would fall off, but no child ever did. Children almost always hung on things tighter when their parents think that they will. Avery put the frog in his pocket and climbed to the hayloft. Ooh, that seems like a bad idea for the poor frog. The last time I swung on this swing, I almost crashed into the barn swallow, he yelled. Take that fern out. Nope. Fern didn't say take that fern out. She said take that frog out. Avery straddled the rope and jumped, and he sailed out through the door, frog and all, into the sky. Frog and all. And then he sailed back into the barn. Your tongue is purple, screamed Fern. So's yours, cried Avery, sailing out again with the frog. I have hay inside my dress. It itches, called Fern. Scratch it, yelled Avery, and he sailed back. It's my turn. Jump off. And he sailed out. Fern's got the itch. Fern's got the itch, sang Avery. And when he jumped off, he threw the swing up into his sister. She shut her eyes and jumped. And she felt the dizzy drop and supporting lift of the swing. And when she opened her eyes, she was looking up into the blue sky and was about to fly back into the door. There's Fern on the swing. Looks so fun. When the children grew tired of swinging, after taking turns for an hour, they went down toward the pasture and picked wild raspberries and ate them. Their tongues turned from purple to red. Fern bit into the raspberry that had a bad-tasting bug inside and got discouraged. Avery found an empty candy box and he put his frog in it, and the frog seemed tired after this morning in the swing. The children walked slowly up towards the barn, and they too were tired and hardly had energy enough to walk. Let's build a tree house, suggested Avery. I want to live in a tree with my frog. I'm going to visit Wilbur, Fern announced, and they climbed the fence into the lane and walked lazily toward the pig pen. Wilbur heard them coming, and he got up. Avery noticed the spider web. Coming closer, he saw Charlotte. Hey, look at that big spider over there. It's tremendous. Leave it alone, commanded Fern. You've got a frog. Isn't that enough? That's a fine spider, and I'm going to capture it, said Avery. And he took the cover of his candy box, and then he picked up a stick. I'm going to knock that old spider into this box, he said. Wilbur's heart almost stopped when he heard what he was going to do. This might be the end of Charlotte if the boy succeeded in catching her. You stop it, Avery, said Fern. And Avery put one leg over the fence into the pig pen, and he was about to raise his stick to hit Charlotte when he lost his balance. He swayed and toppled and landed over the edge of Wilbur's trough. The trough tipped up and then came down with a slap. The goose egg was right underneath, and there was a dull explosion as the egg broke, and then a horrible smell. I wonder what the smell was. Fern screamed, Avery jumped to his feet, and the air was filled with a terrible gas and smell from the rotten egg. Oh, I forgot about the rotten egg. Templeton, who had just been resting in his home, scuttled away into the barn. Good night, screamed Avery. Good night, what a stink, let's get out of here. Fern was crying. She held her nose and ran towards the house. Avery ran after her, holding his nose, and Charlotte felt greatly relieved to see him go. It had been a narrow escape. Later in the morning, the animals came up from the pasture, the sheep, the lambs, the gander, the goose, and the 7 goslings, and there were many complaints about that awful smell. And Wilbur had to tell the story over and over again about how the arable boy had tried to capture Charlotte and how the smell of the broken egg had driven away just in time. It was that rotten goose egg that saved Charlotte's life. The goose was proud of her share in the adventure. I'm delighted that that egg never hatched, she gabbled. Delighted, delighted, delighted. Templeton, of course, was miserable over the loss of his beloved egg, but he couldn't resist boasting. Pays to save things, he said in a surly voice. A rat never knows when anything's going to come in handy. I never throw anything away. Well, said one of the lambs, this whole business is all well and good for Charlotte, but what about the rest of us? That smell is unbearable. Who wants to live in a barn that's perfumed with a rotten egg? Don't worry, you'll get used to it, said Templeton, as he sat up and pulled wisely at his long whiskers and crept away to pay a visit to the dump. When Larrabee showed up at lunchtime carrying a pail of food for Wilbur, he stopped short of a few paces from the pig pen. He sniffed and made a face. What in thunder? he said. Setting the pail down, he picked up the stick that Avery had dropped and pried up the trough. Rats! Phew! I might have known a rat would make a nest under this trough. How I hate a rat! And Lurvy dragged Wilbur's trough across the yard, kicked some dirt into the rat's nest, burying a broken egg and all Templeton's other possessions. And then he picked up the pail. Wilbur stood in the trough, drooling with hunger, and Lurvy poured. The slops ran creamily down through the pig's eyes and around the pig's eyes and ears, and Wilbur grunted. He gulped and sucked and gulped, making swishing and swishing noises, anxious to get everything at once. It was a delicious meal. Skim milk, wheat middlings, leftover pancakes, half a donut, the rind of a summer squash, 2 pieces of stale toast, a third of a ginger snap, a fishtail, 1 orange peel, several noodles from noodle soup, the scum off a cup of cocoa, an ancient jelly roll, a strip of paper from the lining of the garbage pail, and a spoonful of raspberry jello. Wow, that's a lot of food. Wilbur ate heartily. He planned to leave a half noodle and a few drops of milk for Templeton. Then he remembered that the rat had been useful in saving Charlotte's life, and that Charlotte was trying to save his life. So he left a whole noodle instead of a half. A whole noodle doesn't seem like a whole lot. I wonder if that was enough for Templeton. I wonder if Templeton felt like that was a reward. I wonder. Now that the broken egg was buried, the air cleared and the barn smelled good again. The afternoon passed and evening came. Shadows lengthened. The cool and kindly breeze of evening entered through the doors and windows. Astride in her web, Charlotte sat moodily eating a horsefly and thinking about the future. After a while, she bestirred herself. She descended to the center of the web, and there she began to cut some of her lines. She worked slowly, but steadily, while the other creatures dozed. None of the others, not even the goose, noticed that she was at work. And deep in his soft bed, Wilbur snoozed. Over in their favorite corner, the goslings whistled a night song. Charlotte tore quite a section out of her web, leaving an open space in the middle. Then she started weaving something to take the place of the threads she had removed. And when Templeton got back from the dump around midnight, the spider was still at work. So we had a lot of questions in this chapter. What was the smell? How did it smell? How did Avery catch that frog? Well, I think some of those questions were answered, and some of them stayed unanswered, and that's okay too. Just like Wilbur's boast, we still don't really have a full understanding about what. But I do know that Charlotte is up to something, and I can't wait to find out what happens next in chapter 11, The Miracle. So be sure to tune in to The Miracle with us as we focus on questioning strategy and continue to read this beautiful book by Evie White, Charlotte's Web. Thanks so much for joining us today, and thank you for enjoying our love of reading together. Till next time.